Om Bhurбhuvah Swaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Nah Prachodayat. O God, the giver of life, the remover of pains and sorrows, bestower of happiness, and creator of the universe, thou art most luminous, pure, and adorable. We meditate on thee. May thou inspire and guide our intellect in the right direction. Namaste. Thank you. Over to you, Karuna. You're on mute.
Thank you. Welcome to everybody. For those of you who don't know me, and I'm sure most of you do know me, I'm Karuna, and thank you for joining us in this webinar. We will be focusing on social cohesion and social justice. I'd like to just go through a few rules. Basically, we're going to make sure everybody is muted so that nobody actually disturbs the proceedings and no sounds will come from your end. If you do have a bandwidth problem, then it's best for you to conserve the bandwidth to basically close your video. But I think it's important for those who are on to, especially those who are speaking, to actually have their video on. We have a chat facility. Please use it. Place your comments, place your views. We want this webinar to be participatory, and you are indeed encouraged to share your views. To speak during the discussion session, please unmute yourself. Once you have spoken, mute yourself again. There is also a functionality to raise your hand, so we know you want to speak. And if you do raise your hand, to get to it, you can click on the more, the button that says more. That should help you to actually get through and raise your hand. Now, these virtual bridge series was conceptualized by the Arya Samaj in Gauteng as small steps that we are taking to share knowledge, to better understand the challenges facing society, and to grow and develop spiritually. We commenced this during the lockdown in May 2020, and the first part of the series ran till the 25th of September. After that, of course, the economy and everything opened up. We had 12 lectures in that period, and following the first lecture, the Arya Samaj joined the Climate Coalition, the Climate Justice Coalition, and is a signatory to the Climate Justice Charter. In addition, the Arya Samaj has supported the call for the basic income grant, which I think you all would know the president did make mention of in the State of the Nation. At the last lecture of the first series, we discussed Ubuntu. And basically, we're keen to actually work on a program on Ubuntu in the Arya Samaj in Gauteng. And a lot of these matters were reinforced in the last webinar we had. So we're very keen on adopting an interfaith program. And in that sense, we are really glad that you're with us, Amina. In the current series of the Virtual Bridge, we took the form of seminars online, which are webinars, and our theme is finding meaning in the current context. We started this in October and we'll run through to November this year. The focus of this series of the webinar is on reform in religion, revolution in society, and liberation of mindsets as set out by the founder of the Arya Samaj. The Arya Samaj led the way with equality for women and education for women. And the Arya Samaj played a big role in bringing an end to the caste system that defined the status of people in society. So the Arya Samaj, in effect, actually is based on equality. In October, in our session, we discussed gender and economics. In November, we discussed Who Am I? Creating a balance between ancestry, heritage, and identity. In December, we discussed the developmental state. And incidentally, we have a very good track written out by Pandit Nardev, which gives us guidelines for the interaction with state, for the lobbying for change, for democracy, and for development. It's called Hindu polity and administration. Of course, we do know that the state, a good state, requires capability, responsibility, accountability, and ethical behavior. And these are critical aspects that we need to consider. But in today's seminar, we're looking at society as a whole. Now, in our last seminar, we discussed socioeconomic justice, and the Arya Samaj basically is a signatory to the Climate Justice Charter, which it has been presented to Parliament, and it would be important going forward to get all members of all families to actually sign the petition so that our Parliament realizes that the Constitution allows them to adopt a charter developed by the people. In May, our webinars will focus on what can we do in South Africa regarding the issues we're discussing in each of the webinars. So please take notes, remember these issues, mull about them, and share your views when we have those webinars in May. And make your contribution to a future where we're looking at society, we're looking at justice, we're looking at democracy. Friends, on the 20th of February, it was World Social Justice Day. Social justice, as Ujala did raise in our last seminar, points to equity, access, participation, and rights, while social cohesion is about a willingness of members of society to cooperate with each other and to survive and prosper. Now, the SACP some years back, I think, Leslie, when you were still in the SACP, you had a very interesting program on housing, health, and hunger. These are three aspects that have divided society and led to many social abuses. Now, is there an even-handed approach on access to resources? Are we all able to participate, each according to need, each according to ability, as Marx put in the Grundrisse? We are not too sure. Friends, in 1996, human rights and freedoms were finally enshrined as goals in the Constitution, as inalienable rights guaranteed to all. Human dignity, the achievement of equality, and the advancement of human rights and freedoms are the founding provisions of our Constitution, articulating the essence of what it means to be human and a citizen in South Africa. The right to vote, the right to own land, the right to education, the right to strike and protest, the right to organize, the right to a fair trial, the right to trade, the right to associate, the right to freedom of movement are fundamental rights and freedoms. But rights on paper and in the Constitution only establish a framework within we can live and act. But this does not necessarily translate to rights in practice. The protection, defense, and practice of rights is developed through organization and increasing the understanding and awareness of our people. It is only when people engage in social contracts and give meaning to fundamental rights that human rights becomes a reality and indeed a practice and a living thread of our social fabric. Thus, it is only when people understand and practice human rights that freedoms that we all have and freedoms, then we will have a democratic society. In Hinduism, we talk of Vasudeva Kutumbakam. The word is one family. This is a Vedic adage that we all strive towards. Vasudeva Kutumbakam is not only about peace and harmony in society, in the world, but it's also about a truth that somehow the whole world has to live by some rules like a family. Just by contemplating this idea, and at least by trying to live by it and practice it in our lives, we could make this world a better place. Plato in his Republic, Aristotle in his concepts on democracy, virtue and ethics, Machiavelli in The Prince, Rousseau in the Social Contract, and Marx and Engels in the Communist Manifesto, and Gramsci in his Front and Alliance processes, all attempted to point out ways and means of making the world a family and what rules would be needed when a family unit engages within the world, within a society, or within a country. So Vasudeva Kutumbakam conveys succinctly that we prosper or sink as one family. It broadens our consciousness by underlying that human beings are one family. We know from our experience that we have many divisions to overcome. Today's webinar will focus on social cohesion and social justice. With this introduction, we hopefully will discuss today how best can the Arya Samaj develop a focus on social cohesion and social justice. And we have invited two panelists. We advertised 3 panelists, and I do have an apology from Monty. He's promised to come at some other time and speak. Unfortunately, he's out of town and could not be back in time. And where he is, there isn't any connectivity. He's in one of the deep rural areas. So we have today Amy Fakude, who is an activist for peace, developmental, civic education, and justice. And she serves as the chairperson of the National Interfaith Council of South Africa and is a member of SAWIT, the South African Women in Dialogue, and is a very active member of MUSA, the movement, a very new movement for a united South Africa. Amy, I must say it's really nice to have you here because I do think, we want to build this interfaith bridge. This bridge, we want to make sure that we talk to everybody, and I know you're doing quite a bit of work on that. Leslie de Kenny, friends, is an urban sociologist and a very independent thinker. He's led projects on nation formation and social cohesion and on poverty and patronage at MISTRA, the Makungu Bwe Institute for Social Research. He's authored a number of books also, Habitat and Struggle, The Case of Kruger National Park, South African Development Perspectives in Question, Poverty of Ideas is another very good book, and Nation Formation and Social Cohesion, an inquiry into hopes, aspirations of South Africans. His forthcoming book is entitled Music, Agency and Power, and I'm waiting for it. So Leslie, the pressure is on you. Friends, we'll first have Amina to share with us a few ideas that she's had and her experiences. She's been working on a number of things, but today she's going to talk to us about the social ills in society. Amina?
Thank you, Karuna. Good evening, everybody. It's my honor to be with you, and I'm so glad to get to know so much about Arya Samaj. I didn't know about it before, and I love the topic, social cohesion and social justice. It's a very difficult situation to talk about. In fact, it is a very painful one. On our 27th year of liberation, and we know we still haven't achieved it, and there is no hope in sight for it. So, in approaching it, I'll say my vision is to deliver the reconstruction and development of the soul for the realization of a true freedom by building a shared constitutional and universal identity of all the people of South Africa. And that can only happen if all the people of South Africa embrace Ubuntu within a South Africa that is cohesive. And for the South Africa to be cohesive, we definitely need all the people to begin to engage, to begin to talk to one another. And when people talk to one another, they need to be purposeful, talk about a value system that makes them a people. We seem to think when we see a community or society or nations, we seem to think of a lot of people. That is just a family. A nation is a family, and a family is anchored on a value system. And the highest of the values that human beings espouse in every association that they are at is the right to life. They protect one another with everything they've got. We need to build a society like that to achieve social cohesion. And to do so, we respect first the right to life. The right to life is the paramount right to all existence. All creation depends on this right to stay alive and to sustain itself. So, what exactly drives the right to life itself? It is driven by three pillars. Those pillars are the quality of life. That is pillar number one. Every living being and every human being knows that while life is fundamental to survival and continued existence, it is the quality of life that makes life worth living. A good quality of life is built by the people living it around a value system they choose to espouse, around principles they choose to uphold, and the rules they choose to live by. That becomes their way of life, their shared way of life. And they are given equal opportunity to the quality of life. That is the first recognition of the right to life. The right to life is the first constitutional right in the South African Constitution 108 of 1996. The second pillar of the right to life is equality. Equality for all is valued, and opportunities given equally to all people make people willingly arise to work together to improve the world. Equality inspires in all people compassion, empathy, and love. Actually, when equality is extended to people, people strive to be equal. Equality arises where people have simple, open, honest conversations, purposed for the good of one and all equally. The third pillar of the right to life is growth for all. It is undoubtedly essential for growing the quality of life. All human beings from day one, in fact, from before they're even born, they grow. Every human being, consciously or unconsciously, daily strives to grow into their innate potential. This needs to be supported and aided by fellow human beings, more so by the government. When everyone's growth is recognized and supported, the inherent potential of individuals and communities becomes expressed and fulfilled, thereby improving the quality of life. When growth of any person is hampered, there is no possibility of social evolution and social sustainability. As a result, communities helplessly and hopelessly wallow in social ills. Let me talk about social ills before I go into the gist of social cohesion. In South Africa, we're beset by lots and lots of social ills. And we might all know where they started and how they started. In the first place, we come from a history of fragmentation. We lived as races, and we were made to believe that, and it was taught didactically, even in our classrooms, that we were different and we concentrated on differences. And spiritual life, like our spiritual homes, as a Muslim, for instance, told me that I am not a race. There's only one race, which is the human race. And this polarization of thinking and perception and understanding things crippled the understanding of life. And when we became liberated in 1994, Madiba spoke of the reconstruction and development of the soul. Unfortunately, at the time when he spoke, we were all very excited. We were euphoric about liberation. We didn't realize that it wasn't government that was going to give us social cohesion. It was us. Social cohesion is our responsibility. Social justice is our responsibility. It is society, more so faith leadership, more so interfaith, which means all faiths. It is our duty to direct all citizens towards revering the right to life based on community consensus. It is our duty to get people talking to one another, because the background that we had caused us to fear one another. And besides fearing one another, it caused us to despise one another, because there were people that were inferior and there were people that were superior. Very sinful outlook to life. So, revering the right to life based on community consensus suggests community cohesion achieved through intergenerational dialogues of citizens, which means we need to talk now as citizens about our constitution, which is our framework for change from apartheid to a democratic dispensation. We have to be cohesive as a people for the first time, not despising one another, but knowing that we belong to one race, which is the human race, and we belong to one nation, which is the South African nation. The right to life sessions that we could have with the people if we start the dialogue, that is all of us, the interfaith, would be guided and directed by decisive, dedicated, devoted, unambiguous, unequivocal thought leaders, the think tank of society that is elected or selected by society itself, not politicians. They could be politicians if they are of an ethical standard that is required to bring people to a cohesive state and to a collective justice state. Because right now, the social ills we're having, one of them is we are very, very materialistic. Crass materialism is causing greed. And greed is the one that is causing the country to go down. We are a very affluent country, but today it looks like everything is getting reduced to rubble. And our children are on drugs, that is social ills. And our children are on drugs because their fathers have denied them, and some of them, their mothers, have abandoned them. And grannies are turning into mothers, looking after little children now. That is what is happening. And because of that, children grow up experiencing violence, and children learn what they live. Since they see so much violence, fathers and mothers breaking up, divorces, and children being abandoned, that's what they are going to become too. Hence, some of them can't cope with the problems they're having. In fact, I sometimes look at us and think these social ills point to our mental health that was never addressed. I wish and pray that one day we'll realize that we need to reconstruct society and we need to reconstruct the soul. And we can do that only by getting everyone from everywhere to talk to one another. So these Right to Life sessions that are guided by thought leaders will make people realize that they elect governments to safeguard their rights, but it is citizens who determine how to live in harmony with one another by mandating government on what measures they want, put mechanisms in place to enable just coexistence on agreed social terms. It is civil society that makes those social terms together, and they mandate government. Government doesn't just go to parliament to make laws or to talk about what they're going to do for the people. It is the people who say this is what they want done. This is not possible unless citizens engage and willingly work together as equals, co-create their world out of their own mutual exercise of the right to life for all. Citizens need to work together to the extent that they develop not only compassion, empathy, and love for one another, but they recognize that the love for one another is an injunction from the Almighty for all men to live equally and for all men to live justly. In the course of open, honest conversation purposed for the good of one and all, compatriots, I hope, will mutually achieve a national identity and affirm themselves as a people, a nation. That will be the day we will say we have social cohesion. As things stand, one of the ills we have is that we, as South Africans, do not even have an identity. If I say, how do you know I'm a South African? You can't say. If we meet tomorrow in Italy together, you might just get to know I'm a South African by tone, but there's nothing common between us. We need something common between us that makes us South Africans. Social evolution or social justice occurs when a community recognizes, reveres, and beneficiates one another's right to life. When you see another human being, your compatriot, you wish for him what you wish for you. You share with him what you have for yourself. You don't be selfish. Visible signs of cohesions are interaction experienced when all citizens operate within compassion and empathy to evolve and grow into a close-knit, caring people that love and trust one another. Together they strive to espouse such life-enriching virtues and admiration. They admire one another. They believe in one another. They are benevolent towards one another. They are compassionate towards one another. They exercise consideration, cooperation, dignity, fairness, forgiveness, friendliness, honesty, and integrity in dealing with one another. They exercise justice, kindness, love, loyalty, politeness, respect, self-restraint when talking to and about one another. When dealing with issues where they need to argue, they exercise sportsmanship and tolerance. They disagree, but still understand and still work towards finding the middle ground or finding one another straight away without having to fight each their corner. And as they do all these, and as they exercise all these virtues, they reminisce each their childhood and remember that these virtues are primary values imparted in every home and lived in every community. These are the values that have sustained myriads of generations since the beginning of time, with a potential to endure to the end of time. The values derive expression through the lives of mankind because they are actionable, lived values. School does not teach values, it endorses them. It is family that inculcates these values, and it is community that hones them in the maze of social immersion. So, in order to achieve social cohesion, we need to build strong families so that we have strong communities. And our children come from those communities to become a nation. No government can fashion value precepts or virtues for society. Families integrate into communities, blended into a society to make a people, that is, a nation. Social justice is the twin sister or the younger sister of social cohesion. Because where there is no social cohesion, there can be no social justice. People have to first understand one another and flow together like a tidal wave. Then justice will be dispensed among them, and they will work towards doing just that. As people together appreciate that, the joy and pleasure arise only in honest hearts committed to mutual beneficiation and enhancement. This is the making of an ethical society, capable of mutually identifying and enjoining what is right while forbidding what is wrong in their shared life world. They guard the environment together. They collectively agree among one another how they want to live and how they don't want to live. For cohesive engagement or for cohesive engaging communities, being good is a very active and powerful force that is explored and tested in dialogue with fellow citizens. It is fashionable to be good in a socially cohesive community for the purpose of just and effective discharging of one another's right to life. As they work together as equals, they mutually realize the virtue rather than vice leads to prosperity. It might look like those that commit vices are prosperous, but the truth is they are not. People who are socially cohesive together are aware too that while the immoral look outwardly thriving, they lead unbelievably tragic lives filled with anxiety, fear, even shame and suffering. That is a life and a legacy no one wants to impart to the future generations. Human virtues are the right face of a well-lived, responsible, and sustainable life. we South Africans, all, each, collectively and individually, can do this together. Fully confident that none of us will ever have to do it alone. Neither will any of us be alone, because in the only legitimate existing race in life, there is only one race, which is the human race. And it is fashioned by the Almighty Creator, who provides that we need to listen to one another and we need to work together, because whether one has multiple degrees and another is unlettered, everyone is a teacher, because no one knows nothing. And equally, everyone is a learner, because no one knows everything. So we need to engage, argue, and agree or disagree, yet remain here till consensus is reached and advance together into our shared destiny, our nationhood, as members of the human family. Thank you. And Nixa would like to extend an invitation to the Arya Samaj to be part of the National Interfaith Council of South Africa. I love the spirit of the Arya Samaj. I believe we would work together to provide the moral compass to our beautiful nation. Our children need to inherit a flourishing country. And I'm deeply sorry that my computer wouldn't work today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elmira. Thank you very much, Amy. I think basically your last point of inviting the Arya Samaj to join the council, we have our president on Aarti, and what I will do is share with her your email and contact details, and I'm pretty sure she'd be willing to pick that up. Basically, I'd also like to welcome Comrade Mandla to this webinar. Welcome, Comrade Mandla. It's been years since we've seen you. Now that you're no longer the MEC and the minister, I don't know if you're still in the minister's offices. I see you have time to join us on webinars. It's really great to have you. Friends, we're now going to ask Leslie DeKenny to share his views. And he is actually going to give us a critical appraisal and a critical approach to social cohesion. He's written a lot of books on it and he's done a lot of research on it. And so hopefully we're going to hear from him what's the social cohesion all about. By the way, he's also worked in the YCS. I know he's no more a religious person, but he's worked in the YCS and has been involved in liberation theology, creation and thinking. So it will be nice to have his views also on the issue of social justice. But his topic is literally social cohesion, a critical appraisal of it. Thank you, Leslie.
Yeah, thank you, Karina. And I think you said Monty was going to come in. I think you should have explained that, because when you invited us, you said that this is how the panel is going to be. And then you mentioned that Monty was also going to be speaking. And I think his particular subject was to look into the South African social economy, its decay, or its problems, or let's use the other speaker's words, the maladies of the South African economy, or in general, the sufferings that South Africans are facing. So I was going to move from that point. However, since then, I have decided to do my presentation in such a way that I am not going to give you bullet points of what constitutes social cohesion. Neither am I going to give you a direct critique of what I think social cohesion is. The third point, I think, in my presentation that people must take into account is that there's not going to be any chronology, but rather what I'm going to do is to try and anecdotally give you key points that I think are points that we need to continue focusing and thinking and engaging with the concept of social cohesion. Because I don't think that on this concept, anyone, or that this concept actually should be treated as concepts that, as like a receipt booklet. But I think that we should be constantly continuing debating, engaging, and so on and so on with the concept. So that then I'm saying you'll connect the dots yourselves in my presentation. Having said that, the second point before I actually go to my starting point, it's quite nice. It's surprising. It's the first time I hear spirituality linked to social cohesion. So it's maybe another angle that we must explore, or that I also would have to explore in the future. And I must say that in the work that we have done, we've not actually looked at spirituality and social cohesion, but we have seen, we've looked at the role of religion influencing and changing society, and this therefore helping to shape a cohesive society. Now let me start. And my starting point is that the debate about social cohesion is not a new debate. It's been ongoing, and I saw Karone quoting a lot of Marxists and classics and so on and so on. So this debate has been there, but it has really been informed by the need to say, how do we build nations? How do we build nations when nations are fragmented, divided? So in Europe itself after the Second World War needed to think about social cohesion, or even pre-Second World War had to be thinking about that. The rest of Africa, in most of our African states, and let me say pre-colonial and post-colonial, we needed social cohesion. In Asia, the same thing. In Latin America, Brazil, Peru, Bolivia, you can mention all of the Latin American countries. And I think it's important to always, sometimes in our debates at home, and in the continent, to start really, regaining the old paradigm at a global level of also mentioning Latin America, because there's a lot of things that you can learn from the struggles that took place there, and pre-colonial and post-colonial. So I'm trying to say that it's not a new debate, and it's not a South African debate, but it is a debate that takes different forms and shapes nationally, in countries, and within those countries at a macro and micro level. By that I mean regional, provincial, local level. And within those different scales of analysis themselves, it takes different unique forms and shapes, as it is in South Africa. Now, as you said, I'm not going to, and as I've said, I think we're now familiar, we are quite clear almost what the concept of social cohesion means for us in the world in different ways. So I'm not going to go into what is social cohesion step by step. I think a lot has been written about that, and I'm personally tired of doing it. In Mistra, I spent 18 months having to study that kind of a subject. So I'm not going to bore us with that issue. Suffice But it's important to say that it is a good working concept, and it is a concept that has gained ground in many different societies. And I'm going to start on a different note before I go to the theoretical explanations of it, or the critical theoretical approach that I would want to take to it. Because when I go on that way, you may assume, you may actually critique me by saying that I don't want social cohesion. So let me make very clear. The opposite to social cohesion is social implosion. Now, we don't want countries to implode. We want to build countries. We want to build, and in particular, in our case in South Africa, I'll emphasize here, and I must put the emphasis in our case and put the emphasis of the fact that in our case, historically, we have been a country that was colonized. And I think the other speaker alluded to those things of what colonialism meant and apartheid meant. We all know what it meant. Racial divisions, gender divisions, class and social economic divisions, religious divisions, cultural divisions, ethnic divisions that we all know in South Africa. These are all the baggages of colonialism. But we fought in South Africa, and we fought in different ways. And in our fight, we fought precisely against colonialism and apartheid. We fought against all these because we wanted to forge a new nation in South Africa, and that a nation that is non-racial and democratic. We've done so successfully. And I think the point of emphasis in the issue around colonialism is the fact that we have to admit that we are now in a post-colonial South Africa. We have to admit also importantly so that our state, and I mean the state, is a post-colonial state. I'm saying so because there are times, moments where when I listen to social media, when I listen to the radio, when I listen to a very number of people, it looks like there are some people who still treat our state as a colonial state. There's critiques against the state, which is a post-colonial state, are not sharpened enough to be able to be specific and critique a contemporary South African state. They seem to be like scratch records of the past. So the challenge, I think, for all of us is to begin to try and find new theoretical ways of critiquing the current state in South Africa. We have then this state, but we all know that poverty, inequality persists, it exists. And once again, I'm not going to mention, because I think there are many, many other studies that have dealt, I mean, that shows that. However, in our quest of building a socially cohesive society in South Africa, but elsewhere as well, and this is where my problem with the concept sometimes comes in, is that there's an assumption that we will just sweep away, forget these racial inequalities, these gender imbalances, etc., that were brought to us by colonialism. And we will all just be happy because now we are within a socially cohesive society. And I think that as well is not only coming from us, neither does it come necessarily from the state. I think the market and the market forces, and especially direct or foreign investors, impose this on us. Because markets, which is right and which is fair, don't like ruptures in a society. They like to do what we have set ourselves as an objective, to build a socially cohesive society, and therefore make sure that when you do so peacefully. And I think we've taken that path, and I hope that in South Africa will maintain and continue on that path. However, I think at the theoretical level in other countries, and a country that helps me as a case to illustrate my point, is way back before the Arab Spring, I think that's the word, yes. In Tunisia. Tunisia, if you look at Tunisia, was almost just like we are in South Africa, cohesive. There was no war, there was nothing. And as I've said, markets like Tunisia at that time. But what was happening in Tunisia, I would tend to disagree, was not social cohesion. It was state repression. Because whilst there was this cohesiveness in Tunisia, I mean, if you go to any economist or any historical data before the Arab Spring, you will see how huge the levels of inequalities were in Tunisia. Hence, the incident of someone killing himself, etc., and hence it imploded. So my point, therefore, then is that we have to differentiate between state repression, which seeks not to allow any form of dissent for those who are marginalized, who are facing the weight of economic pressure. It can be that society is socially cohesive, because there can be no social cohesion unless these racial inequalities, these binary oppositions of class, these gender differences that are huge, gender oppression, in other words, women, the violence that is happening in our societies and so on, and the way men treat women, as long as those exist, and the huge racial inequalities that we are faced, caused by, indeed, colonialism and apartheid. Unless those cease to exist, we shall never have a socially cohesive society, because there will be forces reacting to the state, to capital, and so on and so on. So we can never have a socially cohesive society until we have that. I can go on and give examples of what is happening in the country now, but I'm not going to do that. So that repression does not, and I repeat, does not create a socially cohesive society. The second thing that those who are proponents of social cohesion are doing, and as I said earlier on, it's about building a nation. It's about dealing with racial inequalities. Those racial inequalities are, in fact, the more we reduce them, the more the nation unites. The more you still have a Soweto, no, Soweto is even better now. A Kaelicha and a Constantia. It's going to be hard to build that type of society, a socially cohesive society. Now, what does this leave us with? And what is the problem with using the current concept of social cohesion? There is okay, this is actually a point connected to the other points that are related to, but it's very important. The assumption is that when you have a socially cohesive society, you are having a homogenized society. Quite clearly in South Africa, we don't have a homogenized society, but I would think that even in countries where they have one single nation, you cannot talk about a homogeneous society. We've moved away from the era of ice blocks where we think that people can just be like blocks. Even in a household, I would argue, people have got differences, act differently, have different forms of taste, so that you can be heterogeneous and yet have a socially cohesive society. And I think in South Africa, compared to other parts of the world, I think we've upped our game on that one. But there are people, and I'm not going to mention groups and so on, but we do know there are people who would want us to take us back from that. Yeah, and I think those would be, that would, for example, be one of the issues that I would think may pose difficulties for us in South Africa. Now, do we think that social cohesion will have a moment in a time where we say we cannot work towards a socially cohesive society? I doubt that very much. In my view, at the theoretical level, I don't think that gender imbalances are going to end at some point. There's going to be a cutoff date of saying there's no more gender imbalances. I think that the racial inequalities that we have to deal with in our own country are very far from disappearing. But we always have to constantly work towards changing them, towards working to and I don't think there will be an egalitarian society, but there will definitely be a society where we can be able to say people can comfortably live a comfortable life, a life that is good enough. So for me then, social cohesion is an episode with no end. And I think if we have that conceptually in our minds, then we will better be able to understand what the concept means and work towards sustaining the concept. Now, there's two other points that I think are important in the debate, which I think sometimes also people tend not to analyze very carefully when they deal with this. And those are, for me, within this debate, in all the literature that we get on social cohesion, two fundamental conceptual issues remain problematical and have to be clarified. And that is colonial oppression and racial oppression. Those are two different things. Example of this is that I was reading a book by Mahmoud Mamdani yesterday, and I tend to agree with him when he says that there's a difference between the two. And that is, for example, in North America, let's be honest, African Americans are faced with racial oppression. They are not faced with colonial oppression. Yet in the South African context, we are faced with both. In North America, I think those who were facing colonial oppression and racial oppression are Indians, for example. So I think these are some of the questions and conceptual problematizations that within the debate of what social cohesion means, we still have to iron out as time goes on. Finally, and as I've said, it's an episode with no end. And it cannot be controlled.
Oh.
Hello? Hello? Can you hear me? It cannot be controlled, but while social cohesion cannot be controlled, and that's why I applaud the South African government, I think it is important to say that the state has a very important role in fostering social cohesion. But the reality is that social cohesion can only be shaped by different social actors in society, state, churches, and so on, civil society, etc., etc. I'm a bit afraid to say civil society because civil society, as we know now, is no longer a homogeneous entity itself. It's a very diverse entity. But it's different social actors, groups and individuals in society who are faced by everyday life struggles. And who are involved in those struggles. Who will shape and create a socially cohesive society. So it cannot be managed by anyone. It will evolve. Then again, in terms of state intervention, we know that the state has got an important role in that process, and that is to intervene in this huge economic, social, cultural, binary oppositions that exist within our society. I think I should end there. Hello?
Leslie, thank you very much, Leslie. We've heard you. I think, friends, this issue is pretty complex, but it would be important now to move on and open up for discussion. We have a few questions, and as I explained earlier on, to share your views, please either put it in the chat or basically unmute yourself and or raise your hand. The first question we have is from Mujala, and she's raising, this question is directed to Almina. The question is, why do you think the nation building project failed in South Africa? And I think the second question is more linked to Leslie, and it's about the fact that, yes, we have a very complex situation, and we are in a post-colonial society. We are also in post-apartheid society, but when do we move on? And if the post-colonial society is caused by the colonial past, how do we define our present? Is our present still a colonial present? Because we do have a compedro bourgeoisie developing in the country with all the corruption and the greed and stealing and the looting. There are problems, and their behavior is the very same as if it was happening in the colonial times. So those are the two questions. And my third question, and that's a question from me, I think we've seen a lot of polarization taking place throughout the world. And in particular, some of the polarization is linked to religion. It's linked to different forms of religion, whether it's Christianity in the United States, whether it is Hinduism in India, where there's a nationalism that's linked to being linked to fundamentalist thinking in Hinduism, or whether it's the youth who are being displaced by migrants from Africa in terms of the jobs all over Europe. There's a narrow contestation of nationalism that's building up. And that's a new form that's coming about in the world. And I think it would be nice to hear views on that. Almina, can we have do we have any more questions? Any more people want to say anything? I think there's one more thing in the chat. I think we've covered what's in the chat. Are there any more points? Okay, if there aren't any questions, then I'm going to ask Amina to respond first, and then Leslie to... Manita, thank you.
Good evening, and good evening to the panel. Mine is not a question, but more a comment. And I'd just like to say that I think that for me, really, it's a great conundrum that while I truly recognize deep in my soul that, the need for social cohesion is great, I also, though, I want to preserve my very own unique persona. I identify as South African, but equally as female, of a minority race, and of a minority religion. Equally, I accept that in order for social cohesion to truly succeed, I have to cast off the boundaries by which I define myself. And I think that that's a decision which we must now make. It's not a winner-takes-all situation. I think that social cohesion requests faith in the goodness of, in fact, the greatness of simple humanity. So that's what I wanted to share.
Thank you, Manita.
Thank you, Manita. In fact, you answered the first question that is asked of me. Why do I think social cohesion has failed in South Africa? People are more polarized, and the discourse is also more aggressively racialized than it was before. And as time goes on, we seem to be digging out the dirt of yesteryear and using it to drive to stoke more, should I say, animosity, acrimony among races than before. For instance, if you think of 3 years back up to now still, where we are going to be violating the Constitution, someone is going to be violating the Constitution, and when asked to account, then there comes up white monopoly capital. Why? What has it got to do with accountability? Or maybe then, why not account first? Then afterwards, let's talk about white monopoly capital. So this whiteness and blackness is amazing. And we go on forms or on paper where we ask people for race, and there's even a new race now, a Black African. I can't understand what that is. And I wonder why people are not just Africans or whatever else they choose to be, but Africans, because every other race is referred to according to their continent. So why are they Black Africans? Are there any white Europeans? I don't know. It worries me that we should be human beings, just a human race, or just South Africans. All of us here, just South Africans, because we are. So I think until we achieve that, until we see ourselves as compatriots of a constitutional democracy, then social cohesion has failed. And even our social behavior right now, as we speak, if you see the polarization that is happening in education, children from peri-urban areas, when it's locked down, they don't have access to online education, whereas children in other areas, so geography determines if you can get educated or not. And the racial segregation of before still determines how well you're going to be educated or how well you're not going to get educated. Whereas if we had that empathy, the haves had that empathy of working together with the have-nots, we would have reached the middle ground by now, where everybody would at least have the basics. And it's getting worse now. The South Africans don't even get jobs. They're sitting at home. And those who can employ prefer to employ foreign nationals, which demonstrates that they still prefer that type of an African who existed during apartheid, who didn't have rights. Because if they get the one who has rights now, they'll have to share with that African on a certain footing. So it demonstrates that we need to build social cohesion, and we're not speaking to one another. Coming from this webinar, there might not be another time when I'm going to be speaking to a multiracial audience. It might take another 2 weeks before that happens. And yet I live in a highly multiracial country. So that is not correct. We need to work on it. And we need to find a way of bringing people together to talk to one another and to develop their country. Because this country will be developed by South Africans. If not, it's going to be one of the other examples of African countries that go to ashes after liberation. Thank you. What else did you ask me, Karuna?
No,
You
I
asked me
think
another question. You asked me 2 questions.
no, there was just one question to you. It was
Oh.
about nation formation. Why the nation building project has failed in South Africa.
Yeah, like I've said, we are not at all a nation. We are still different racial groups, and that's how we still align ourselves. And that's how we still see ourselves. That's why I said, thank you to the lady who spoke before me, because she defined exactly how she sees herself, and she's not the only one. As a teacher, I see it even among students. You find that if you have different race group students, they will choose their friends according to their races. So we're socializing our children like this too. it's something we have to make sure now it's dead and buried. We've got to work on it and make certain that we are South Africans, all of us. And if we want to be Africans, we're Africans, all of us. And if some of us don't want to be Africans, they still want to be Europeans and colors and Indians, you can say, like African Americans, you can say, I'm an Indian South African, I'm a European South African, then the other one is an African South African. End of story. But not this color thing. Nobody's white, nobody's black, nobody's pink. People are just people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amira. Can we have you, Leslie, to cover your...
Let me be very clear about a number of things. One is that, you see, I don't think that the project for nation building or social cohesion in South Africa is failing. Neither do I think it began in 1994. The project for nation building and social cohesion in South Africa started long before that, during the liberation movement struggle. It was steeped within those struggles. It was steeped within the history of the African National Congress and other liberation movements, including the South African Communist Party. Very important, because it is in Cape Town in 1955 that all South Africans who were opposed to colonialism and apartheid went, sat down, and articulated a vision for what South Africa is. Debatably, some people may agree or disagree, but those views are now within the document called the Freedom Charter. And I would say that our vision for nation formation and social cohesion and nation building even goes far beyond the vision of many, many other countries in the continent, in the world itself. But I've never seen in the history of any other liberation movement, a liberation movement that was like ours, that declared, as it is declared within the Freedom Charter, that South Africa belongs to all those who live in it. Now, that was carried through into our constitution, but you must look at how that historical process evolved into the constitution. So we have to connect those unconnected things. But our colleague, Amina, but our other colleague, the other speaker, the other colleague was talking, the other contribution, I agree. That is precisely why we must not allow people to piss on this constitution. We must, in fact, defend this constitution with our lives. Because this constitution is a very, very same constitution that we all fought for. We didn't only fought for it, we tested it by people going to elections and voting for the constitution. Now, as we know, there are a number of people, and especially the so-called group called the RAT group, Radical Economic Transformation, that are now anti the constitution. It is us as citizens who must stand up, fight as hard as we can to make sure that no one will walk over that constitution. It's our constitution, and no one, not a single president, whether it is a president, it affects, in fact, there are not the factions within the ruling party. In fact, there's just there's no factions in the ruling party, because a faction is someone who has, that RET group is not a faction of the ANC. It's not, because it doesn't have any sound ideological perspective that it can stand on. A faction, let's define factions. Factions is a group of people, and they existed before in the ANC, with a set objectives, ideological objectives, that differs from that of the party that they belong in or any other party. Now, this group cannot be called faction. This group that now says this constitution is wrong, we must go back and change the constitution. Listen to the words, go back, change the constitution. So you can single-handedly, as a group of people sitting some corner or within the ruling party, tell us now that we now have to change the constitution. So because this constitution embedded in this constitution are those values of a non-racial democratic South Africa, which are values closely connected to a socially cohesive South Africa. So that's what we need to do. Then there's a question that Karuna has also asked. Again, that question belongs to the Constitution because we have a very, very unique Constitution again in South Africa. On the question of religion and so on and so on and so on. We've seen how religious wars in the continent, in Europe, Eastern Europe, for example, in India, and so on and so on. We see conflicts that emerges constantly. It's because if you look at their constitutions and where, even in France, this problem exists. Remember the scarves and non-scarves that people have to do. In South Africa, we have a secular state that guarantees each and every individual religious group. Secular state doesn't mean you have to be an atheist. Secular state basically says you can pray and be whatever you want to be. You can pray to whatever God, Buddha, Allah, or whatever. That is embedded within our constitution. That is why this constitution is so sacred, is so important to us. We must never allow a clique, a group of people, mess up that constitution. And as I've said, they are not a faction. Once we say they are a faction, we assume that they've got theoretical and conceptual, ideological points of view that are differing or that can change or anything. Let's go through a number of their concepts that they often so much use. I mean, really, radical economic transformation itself, it's a wrong concept. There can be nothing radical than transformation itself. Because transformation means changing a status quo. Now that is radical for me. Now, when you start saying radical economic transformation, it's rubrica, it's a rubric, it's not a concept. Then they want to talk to us about colonialism. I mean, really now. And that's the group I was referring to earlier on that seemed to be stuck on trying to tell us we are a colonial state. We are not a colonial state, we are a post-colonial state. They must just get into their heads. If they don't know what colonialism means, let's define it. Let's have a proper discourse on what it constitutes. But don't throw these concepts into our heads as if we don't know. We know what colonialism is. We've even defined it much more better in South Africa compared to others in the world. We've said that in South Africa, we've got what we call a colonialism of a special type. Why do we have it? Because we were colonized by both the Dutch and the English. So I can go on and go on a lecture of what colonialism is. But the fact that we are in a post-colonial state is there. It's real. We didn't fight like in Cuba. We didn't go and take over the country.
Let's move on. There are a few more people who have actually. Yeah, there are a few people who are actually going to be raising a few points, who have raised a few points. And I think Hans has raised that we have the wrong government to create social cohesion. Transit camps are now known as informal settlements and they've exceeded 15 years. In fact, transit camps should not exceed 6 months. Quite correct. So the big issue that has come to bear to us is that there are divisions, and because there are divisions, there are inequities. Because there are inequities, social cohesion is being built. But leadership is required for social cohesion. Jala, your point about the nation building in South Africa, why it failed. It failed because leaders couldn't really make it happen. If the base is being taught the wrong things by the superstructure, then that would happen. If ministers are not servants of the people, but bullies of the people, then basically people will want to aspire to be bullies of the and not servants. So there is that transaction that needs to take place. We do have divisions on race, class, gender, ethnicity, religion, and they're not going to go away. We can't blow them away. So social cohesion is an ongoing process, and social justice is something that I know the religious organizations pull through, and we'll have to begin to look at it. Friends, we come to 8:30, and I'd like to hand over to Rina to close. But before I do that, I just want to remind everybody that our next webinar will be on the 17th of March, where we will commemorate International Women's Day. And our topic is Gender Rights Are Human Rights. We have invited the founder of the Hindus for Human Rights to speak at it. She's Sunita Viswanathan from the USA. On the 31st of March, we will focus on Vedic education and spirituality, and the topic is water and the master elements. And the webinar that was postponed on the 13th of January on Vedic education and spirituality will now take place on the 14th of April. So with those few words, I'd like to hand over to Rina to deal with the closing prayer and the vote of thanks. Rina?
Coming. Thank you, Karuna. Thank you to all the speakers. There's a lot of, Karuna, I know you've put a lot of work into today's presentation, as you do with every other presentation. And thank you to Leka for facilitating, for administering this for us. I'll close out with the peace mantra, the hymn of peace. May there be peace in the heavenly region and the atmosphere. May peace reign on the earth. Let there be coolness in the water. May the medicinal herbs be healing, the plants be peace-giving. May there be harmony in the celestial objects and perfection in eternal knowledge. May everything in the universe be peaceful. Let peace pervade everywhere, and may that peace abide in me. May there be peace, peace, peace. Om Dyo Shantir Antariksham Shanti Prithvi Shanti Rapa Shantir Oshadaya Shanti Vanaspatya Shantir Vishvadeva Shantir Brahma Shanti Sarvam Shanti Shantireva Shanti Sama Shanti Redi Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you.
Good evening.
Thank you.